Grant Whitaker didn't bother to stand. He tapped his fork against a champagne flute until the founder's dining room at Hartford Oaks Country Club went silent. "Since everyone's here," he said, smiling for the donors and board members, "let's stop pretending. Tonight, I'm correcting a mistake." Claire's stomach dropped. Their anniversary cake, white frosting, silver initials, sat between them like a dare. Her wedding ring pinched, swollen from a day of errands for Grant's mother. Grant slid a thick envelope across the linen. It stopped beside Claire's plate and the framed photo of their wedding day. "Divorce papers," he announced. "No alimony, a one-time payment, 25 grand. Take it and disappear." Chairs scraped, heads turned, phones lifted, half hidden behind crystal water glasses. Marlene Whitaker, pearls tight at her throat, all gave Claire a thin smile. "Be grateful," she said. "My son finally grew a spine." Paige snorted. "Maybe now you can get a job that isn't typing in the spare bedroom." And there was Tessa Lang in emerald satin, seated one chair too close to Grant, her hand already resting on his forearm like a claim. Claire had seen Tessa's name on late-night texts. She had also seen the charge for a bracelet Claire never received. Tonight, Grant didn't even bother to deny it. He leaned closer, voice low, sharp enough to cut. "Sign it, Claire. You were never my wife. You were my placeholder." Shock hit first, then the heat of humiliation as every gaze locked on her, waiting for tears, for pleading, for a scene. Claire's eyes drifted past the chandelier to the black dome of the security camera above the bar. Its tiny red light held steady, recording every word, every laugh. Her hands didn't shake. She reached into her purse and drew out a plain, heavy fountain pen. To Marlene it looked like a bargain. To the club's retired judge at the end of the table it was something else. His eyes flicked to the crest on the cap, then to Claire's face, suddenly alert. Grant smirked when she flipped to the last page and signed without reading. "That's it?" he mocked. "No tears? No begging?" Claire capped the pen with a quiet click. "Happy anniversary," she said, calm enough to make him frown. She stood, slid her chair in, and walked out through the glass doors into the cold night air. Her phone buzzed once. "Ma'am, the footage is saved. The driver is waiting at the east gate." Claire Dawson was 43, a medical records clerk at St. Bridget Community Clinic, and the kind of woman who apologized to door frames. Before sunrise, she packed her father's pill organizer, brewed weak coffee, and set aside the last blueberry muffin for her son, Eli, then kissed his forehead and left. Her life ran on small sacrifices. She drove a dented Toyota because Grant said payments were wasteful, and she believed him. At lunch, she called the pharmacy, then the nursing aide, then the school office. Only after everyone answered did she allow herself a breath and a sip of tea. Grant Whitaker looked impressive in public, charity photos, firm handshake, perfect hair, but at home he tracked every dollar like a prison guard. Claire's debit card had a weekly limit, and her phone plan was in his name. When she asked why, he smiled. "Budgeting is love." She nodded, arguing cost her. That afternoon, she left the clinic with a folder of overdue invoices for patients who couldn't pay, and she paid 2 herself, quietly, from her own savings. In the parking lot, her co-worker, Mrs. Jenkins, pressed a homemade casserole into her hands. "You look tired," she whispered. "Don't carry it." Claire forced a smile and promised she was fine. Tonight was their anniversary dinner at Hartford Oaks, the one Grant insisted on hosting for family. He'd told her to wear the plain navy dress, no jewelry, nothing flashy. Still, she tucked a photo of Eli in her wallet like armor. At 6, Grant came home early, humming, cheerful. He showered, used cologne he usually saved for court dates, and slipped on the cufflinks Claire bought him years ago. When he bent to kiss her cheek, she caught a perfume that wasn't hers. She said nothing. Her stomach tightened anyway. On the drive to the club, Grant talked about image and connections, not once asking about her day. His phone kept lighting up face down in the console. At a red light, Claire glimpsed a name on the screen, Tessa, and a heart emoji. Grant snatched the phone and laughed. "Work," he said. Inside Hartford Oaks, staff rushed to add place cards. Grant handed off their coats and left Claire alone by the bar. She saw him greet Tessa with a private smile. When he came back, his briefcase hung open, and a manila envelope read, "Family Law. Confidential." Something was wrong. Tonight for her. Leaving Grant wasn't as simple as walking out with a suitcase. Claire's father, Walt, lived in the downstairs bedroom of their townhouse, a narrow space Grant called dead-weight square footage. Walt's heart medication cost $612 a month, even with insurance, and the clinic's social worker had warned Claire one missed refill could put him back in the ER. The insurance was through Grant's company. Grant reminded her of that every time she resisted him. Eli's school tuition was another chain. Grant insisted on the private academy because public kids are rough. But the payments came from an account Claire couldn't access. When she asked for the login, Grant laughed. You'd panic if you saw grown-up numbers. If she left, Eli would be the first punishment. Claire had no nearby family. Her sister stopped calling after Grant told her politely that outside influence upset Claire. Friends faded when Claire kept canceling dinners to drive Marlene to appointments or attend Grant's networking events. Even her church ladies grew cautious around her, like divorce might be contagious. 2 years ago, when Walt's first surgery drained their savings, Grant refinanced the house in his name to protect the family. Claire signed what he slid in front of her. She hadn't noticed the clause making her responsible for the debt if he defaulted. Last month, a letter arrived from the lender addressed to Claire alone. Notice of liability. She hid it under the flour canister, so she stayed, measuring her life in quiet concessions. She learned to ask permission without sounding like she was asking. She learned to smile at insults so Eli wouldn't see her break. Oh, she learned to swallow questions when Grant came home smelling like someone else. Tonight, at the club, she'd felt the floor tilt. After the dinner, she walked to the restroom and checked her phone. A new email sat there from HR at Whitaker & Sons. Spouse coverage will end at midnight due to policy changes. Her hands went cold. Then another message from an unknown number. If you try anything, your father's meds stop tomorrow. In her purse, her only cash was $60 and a pharmacy receipt. Grant held the car title, the credit cards, even Eli's passport. She was trapped by paperwork, not love, and he knew it. Claire realized Grant wasn't just leaving her. He was cutting her lifeline on purpose. For her father, Hartford Oaks Country Club sat behind iron gates and bare oaks, a manor lit like a stage. Inside, the founder's dining room glowed with chandeliers and cruelty, white linen, silver domes, and a string quartet tucked into a corner. A brass plaque near the entrance read, "Private Event would take her anniversary. Claire paused under it, pulling her navy dress smooth. Around her, women in pearls kissed air, men in cufflinks talked mergers, and waiters moved with the practiced silence of people trained not to hear insults. The room was designed to make ordinary people shrink. Oil portraits stared down from the walls. A microphone stood at the head table for toasts, its red power light blinking. Along the bar, black security cameras sat like glossy eyes. Each had a sticker that said, "Recording in progress." Claire noticed them because she'd spent years noticing anything that could be used against her. Near the service hallway, a wall-mounted monitor displayed feeds from the bar, the entrance, the head table, and the parking lot. The club manager adjusted the angle with a remote and muttered, "Corporate policy. Everything saved to the cloud." At table 12, retired Judge Harmon sipped iced tea, watching the room with calm eyes. Grant's family had chosen this place on purpose. The Whitakers called it tradition, but Claire understood the real reason. At Hartford Oaks, status was a language, and she spoke it with an accent. Her shoes were clean, her hair neat, yet she still felt branded as temporary. A server offered her sparkling water. She thanked him and caught her reflection in the mirrored bar. Tired eyes, a polite smile, hands that kept folding and unfolding. Behind her, Marlene circulated like a queen inspecting furniture, whispering to guests, pointing at Claire once, laughing behind a napkin. Then the doors opened again. Conversation softened, as if the room had turned its volume down for someone important. Grant stepped in, tall and confident, but tonight his cheer looked rehearsed. His tie was new, his grin too wide, and his briefcase was clutched tight against his side as if it held something fragile or sharp. Tessa trailed him, wearing emerald satin and a winning smile. Claire's phone buzzed with one message. "Camera feed backed up. Don't react." She slipped it away, keeping her face neutral as Grant reached for the mic. Grant lifted the microphone, and the envelope edge flashed inside his open case. Grant Whitaker liked control the way some men liked oxygen. At home, he kept the thermostat locked, the pantry organized, and Claire's life reduced to lists he approved. Tonight, he wore the same habit like a tailored suit. In the service corridor outside the dining room, he handed his assistant a sealed packet. "Confirm the HR notice went out," he said. "Spouse coverage ends midnight. I want it clean." When the assistant hesitated, Grant's smile sharpened. "It's policy. Don't make this personal." He checked his phone. A bank alert, a reminder, then a text from his father. "Need good news." Whitaker and Sons was bleeding. Their last contract had slipped, and a lender wanted payment in 30 days. The board was restless, and Grant's promotion to senior partner depended on one thing: the Vanguard logistics meeting he'd teased for weeks. In his mind, Claire was a liability he couldn't afford when he walked into that room. Tessa Lang slid beside him, emerald dress brushing his sleeve. "They're watching you," she murmured. "Make it decisive." She pressed a manicured finger to his tie like she owned the knot. Grant loved that. Tessa's father sat on 2 non-profit boards. Her friends filled private boxes at the opera. With Tessa on his arm, doors opened. Behind them, Marlene approached with a satisfied tilt of her chin. "Do it before dessert," she advised. "Let the witnesses see she's the problem." Grant nodded. Witnesses mattered. He didn't want a divorce. He wanted a verdict. He stepped back into the dining room and found Claire at the edge of the crowd, hands clasped, trying to look small. He leaned close, his voice syruped for anyone nearby and icy for her. "Smile," he whispered. "If you embarrass me, your father's medication stops tomorrow. Understand?" Claire's eyes flashed, then softened into practiced obedience. Now Grant felt the old relief. Her fear meant he was safe. He tapped the microphone. The quartet fell silent. Glasses lifted, phones angled higher. Grant held up the manila envelope like a trophy. "Family," he began, "I have an announcement that's overdue." He glanced at the wall monitor, unaware Judge Harmon had bookmarked the clip. Grant's plan was simple. Shame her, force a signature, and walk into Vanguard on Friday looking unattached, respectable, and ready to be saved. He looked straight at Claire and said, "Come here and sign so everyone can finally see what you really are." Tessa Lang had mastered the art of looking harmless. At 39, she ran fundraising events for the Whitaker Foundation, wore emerald satin like armor, and spoke in soft compliments that landed like blades. To the guests at Hartford Oaks, she was just Grant's friend from the board. To Claire, she was the reason Grant's phone lit up at midnight. Tessa's motive wasn't romance, it was access. Her father's construction company was drowning in debt, and the only bank willing to extend credit was the one courting Whitaker and Sons. If Grant rose to senior partner, Tessa's family rose with him. If he married her, the door stayed open forever. She had done the homework Claire never knew about. 2 weeks earlier, Tessa met Marlene for tea and slid over a folder labeled Asset Protection. She pointed at a line item, Spouse Health Coverage, and asked sweetly, "Isn't it risky to keep paying for someone who might leave?" The next morning, Claire's coverage change was drafted. The email came from HR, but the forwarding address was Tessa's private account. She also planted a rumor that Claire had been borrowing company funds. A copied receipt, a doctored screenshot, slipped into Grant's briefcase with a divorce packet. If Claire protested, Grant could call her a thief. If she stayed silent, the silence would look like guilt. Tessa smiled, sure, the club's cameras would catch everything. Tonight, Tessa made sure the room would judge Claire before Claire spoke. She requested the head table, insisted the microphone be on, and asked the club manager to save the recordings for legal safety. When Claire walked in, Tessa stood and kissed her cheek. The perfume was heavy, territorial. "Oh, you wore navy," she purred, "so practical." As Grant called Claire forward, Tessa leaned toward the nearest guest, loud enough to be overheard. "Poor thing," she sighed. "Grant tried. But you can't fix lack of ambition." The bartender's eyebrows lifted. Judge Harmon's gaze sharpened. Claire felt the words hit her like cold water. She looked at Tessa's wrist and saw the bracelet charge she'd found on Grant's statement, now sparkling openly in the chandelier light. Tessa noticed Claire staring and smiled wider, as if daring her to accuse anything. Then Tessa reached into her clutch and produced a small silver key on a ribbon, placing it on Grant's palm beneath the table as she whispered, "After she signs, we go home." Grant lifted his glass for a toast, smiling at the room as if he were donating a kidney instead of setting a trap. 3 years ago," he said, "I made a generous choice. I married a woman with no family name, no ambition, and no plan, because I believed love could elevate anyone." A few people chuckled. Claire felt every laugh land on her shoulders. The anniversary cake sat untouched, and the silver G+C topper suddenly looked like a joke stamped in metal. Marlene rose halfway from her chair, performing concern. "Claire means well," she announced, "but some women are built to be taken care of. Isn't that right, dear?" Her eyes pinned Claire the way you pin a receipt to prove a return. Grant gestured for Claire to stand. When she didn't move fast enough, he added louder, "Up. Let them see you." A waiter stepped back to give her space like she was about to confess a crime. Claire stood. Her ring felt heavy, and her palms were damp. Across the table, Tessa sipped champagne with a satisfied smile, bracelet glittering like a warning. Grant tapped the envelope against the microphone. "I'm offering her a clean exit," he said. $25,000, more than she's ever earned. In exchange, she signs tonight and stops draining my family's resources." Claire tried to breathe. "Grant, please," she began. He cut her off with a bright laugh. "Don't please me," he said, eyes hard. "You're not my partner, Claire. You're my charity project." The word charity cracked through the room. Someone actually murmured, "Wow!" and a phone camera zoomed closer. At the far end, Judge Harmon set his glass down, face unreadable, eyes moving from Grant to the ceiling camera. The bartender, a thick-armed man in a black vest, quietly turned the monitor brightness up as if preparing for court already. Claire swallowed the taste of iron and forced her voice steady. "My father's medication." Grant's smile didn't slip. It sharpened. "Then don't test me," he whispered, close enough that only she could hear. "Sign, and he keeps his pills. Fight, and you'll watch him suffer." Claire stepped back, dizzy, and the club's wall monitor flickered as the camera feed adjusted. From the service hallway, she caught Grant's assistant speaking into a headset. "Confirm the cancellation," the assistant said. "Whitaker wants Walt Dawson's prescription denied at 9 a.m. Claire didn't argue. She stepped toward the head table because Grant wanted a performance, and she knew resisting would only feed him. But as she walked, she angled slightly toward the bar, letting her eyes sweep the ceiling domes again. Entrance cam 3, bar cam 2, head table cam 1. All pointed inward. The bartender, Marcus, caught her glance. He wasn't family, wasn't bored, just a working man with 2 kids in braces. Earlier, when Marlene snapped her fingers for real vodka, Marcus had watched Grant smile and tip nothing. Now he saw Claire's face, pale, steady, not guilty, and something in him hardened. Grant waved the envelope like a flag. "Sign here," he said into the mic, tapping the signature line with a pen from his pocket. The crowd leaned in. Claire didn't take his pen. She pulled out her own, plain, heavy and calm in her fingers, then set her phone on the linen beside the cake as if it were an afterthought. The screen went dark. The recording icon stayed on. Behind her, Tessa whispered to a guest, "She'll fold. She always does." The guest laughed. The microphone picked it up. Claire turned one page, then another, slow enough to buy seconds. In the margin, she spotted a printed time stamp. Drafted 2:14 p.m. by L. Carver. She lifted the corner just enough for the nearest camera to see the name, then let it fall back. At the bar, Marcus tapped the wall monitor. 4 camera feeds split the screen. He pressed clip, then save, and a message popped up, stored to cloud. 30 days. He didn't know Claire. He didn't need to. He just knew bullies loved darkness, and this room was bright. Judge Harmon's phone buzzed with the club's automated notice, "Recording active." He glanced up. saw Grant's mouth moving, saw Claire's phone lying flat on the table, and quietly hit screen capture on his own device. On Claire's hidden recording, Grant's assistant's headset crackled, and the threat about Walt's prescription came through again, clear and unmistakable. Claire's thumb brushed her purse zipper, feeling the spare SIM card she'd prepared months ago. Grant leaned close, voice low. "Do it," he hissed, "or Walt's refill is denied in the morning." Claire met his eyes and signed her name, stroke by steady stroke, while 3 different screens saved the same moment. Marcus slid a folded receipt into his pocket. Security clip ID number 1187, Whitaker event. Grant didn't let Claire return to her seat. The moment her signature dried, he pressed the folder shut and held it up for the room like a signed confession. "See?" he said into the microphone. "No argument. Even she knows." Laughter rolled, cruel. Marlene clapped once, softly, as if applauding a child's first recital. Tessa tilted her chin, scanning the crowd for who was watching her win. Grant slid his hand over Claire's phone on the table. "Give me that," he murmured. "You don't get to record my family." "It's mine," Claire said, keeping her voice even. He smiled without warmth and signaled the club's security guard, a man in a navy blazer with an earpiece. "Sir," Grant said, loud enough for nearby guests, "my wife is distraught. She may cause a scene. Please escort her out and keep her from harassing anyone." The guard hesitated. Claire saw Marcus at the bar go still. Judge Harmon's eyes narrowed, but the guard was trained to obey members like Grant, not women like Claire. "Ma'am," the guard said, stepping in, "let's get you some air." Grant leaned close, invisible to the crowd. "Hand over the house key," he whispered, "and the insurance card, now." Claire's fingers tightened around her purse strap. Inside were Walt's prescriptions, Eli's photo, the liability notice she'd hidden, and the spare SIM. She didn't want to hand any of it over. Grant's assistant appeared beside them, or holding an envelope. "Change of beneficiary," the assistant said quietly, as if reading a grocery list. "Also, the pharmacy has been notified." Fear flashed through Claire's chest, sharp and physical. She pictured her father's hand shaking without meds. She pictured Eli waiting at the academy gate alone. Claire slid the townhouse key into Grant's palm. Then, slowly, she placed the insurance card on top. Grant's grin returned, bright for the audience. "Thank you for being reasonable," he announced. "Now, everyone, dessert is served." 2 servers rolled in a tray of plated cake as if nothing had happened. The room exhaled. Claire was guided toward the doors, her coat still on the rack, her chair already pushed in as if she'd never belonged. At the threshold, she looked back. Grant was opening his briefcase again, drawing out a second document with a gold seal. He raised it toward the microphone and said, "One more thing. Before she leaves, let's clear up the theft." Grant held the gold-sealed document high, letting the wax catch the chandelier light. "Before Claire plays the victim," he said, "my family deserves the truth." He snapped open a folder and projected a slide onto the wall monitor the club used for board dinners. A spreadsheet filled the screen. Unauthorized expenses. Guests leaned forward. Phones rose again. "Over the last year," Grant continued, "she's been siphoning company funds, small amounts, repeated, pharmacy runs, online transfers, cash withdrawals." He pointed at a line highlighted in red. $612 a month. Funny number, isn't it? Claire's throat tightened. Walt's medication. He'd turned her father's heart pills into an exhibit. Then he lifted the framed wedding photo from the table and turned it toward the crowd. "Remember her vows?" he asked. "Honor, loyalty, sacrifice." He laughed. "She honored us by emptying us." Eli's school picture slipped from the wallet and fluttered to the floor. Someone whispered, "He's doing this in front of a child tonight." Marlene gasped theatrically. "So that's why my account looked off," she said, voice shaking for the audience. "I knew it. I knew she was using us." Tessa stepped closer, pretending concern. "Claire, you should have asked," she whispered loud enough to be heard. "Stealing is so desperate." The security guard reached for Claire's purse. "Ma'am, I need to check it." "No," Claire said, but her voice vanished under the room's murmurs. The guard opened the bag anyway. Out came a pill bottle, a folded school invoice with Eli Dawson printed on top, and the liability notice she'd hidden. A woman at table 5 clicked her tongue. Poor kid. Grant took Claire's wedding ring hand and lifted it like proof. "This ring," he announced, "was paid for by my mother's savings, and she repaid us with theft." Claire tried to pull away. "Grant, that's a lie. I paid—" He cut her off. "Save it." He nodded at the guard. "Escort her out. If she returns, call the police." At the doorway, Claire saw the camera dome above the bar still recording, its red light steady. She saw Judge Harmon's phone held low, capturing sound. She saw Marcus behind the counter, jaw tight, hands clenched. Grant leaned into the microphone one last time. "Claire Dawson is no longer a Whitaker. She's a stranger with sticky fingers." A chair scraped back, and Judge Harmon stood up, saying, "That's enough." Judge Harmon's chair screeched back, but the sound didn't bring relief. It drew attention like blood in water. A dozen guests turned toward him, then toward Grant, waiting to see which man the room would obey. Grant didn't flinch. He lifted a hand, smiling as if addressing a heckler at a comedy show. "Your Honor," he said, voice bright into the mic, "I respect your past service, but this is a private family matter. Please sit." Marlene gasped loudly. "How dare you lecture my son in his own anniversary dinner?" she cried, dabbing dry eyes. "After everything this woman has taken from us." Someone at table 7 murmured, "If Grant says she stole, she stole." Another whispered, "Poor Whitakers." The words moved faster than truth. Judge Harmon opened his mouth again, but the security guard stepped between him and the head table. "Sir," the guard said, polite and firm, "members have asked for no disruption." The message was clear. Credentials didn't matter here. Membership did. At the bar, Marcus stared at the wall monitor, saving another clip. The red recording light blinked steadily. Claire wanted to shout, but her voice felt trapped behind her teeth for once alone. Claire stood by the doors, still held lightly at the elbow, like a package to be removed. She watched faces she'd greeted for years, neighbors, donors, people she'd sent holiday cards, turn away as if eye contact might stain them. A woman from the clinic board clutched her clutch tighter and pretended to read the menu. A man who once thanked Claire for volunteering at his wife's fundraiser stared at his plate. Tessa leaned in close to Grant, her lips barely moving. Claire saw her thumb fly over her phone and heard the soft, vicious click of a photo being taken. Grant raised the divorce folder again. "For everyone's safety," he announced, "Claire is not welcome back on Whitaker property. The locks will be changed tonight." The guard guided Claire into the marble vestibule. Cold air hit her face. Her hand brushed her ring, and her stomach dropped. The band was gone, likely slipped off when the guard searched her purse. She turned, frantic, but the doors were already closing. Through the glass she saw a waiter's shoe kick something small and gold under the tablecloth. Across the room, Tessa lifted a folded paper from Claire's purse, Walt Dawson's prescription authorization, and handed it to Grant's assistant. The club doors shut behind Claire with a soft, expensive thud. Out in the valet lane, winter air slapped her cheeks and turned her breath into smoke. For a second, she just stood there, clutching her purse, listening to laughter muffled through glass and the faint return of the quartet, like the room had already erased her. She walked past the line of black SUVs, past the fountain lit in icy blue, and found a narrow strip of shadow beside the hedges near the east gate. The guard didn't follow. To Hartford Oaks, she was simply removed. Her hand shook when she opened her purse. The insurance card was gone. The townhouse key was gone. She dug deeper, fingers scraping lipstick, receipts, Eli's crumpled permission slip. No prescription authorization. Her throat closed. Then she looked at her bare ring finger and felt a new kind of pain, quiet, humiliating, physical, like someone had peeled her skin. Claire sank onto the low stone curb. Tears came fast, hot against the cold. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth to keep from making a sound. Don't give them the satisfaction, she told herself. Don't give anyone a story about you collapsing. She called the nursing aide first. Voicemail. She called the pharmacy. A robotic voice answered, "Refill request pending, coverage not verified." Claire's chest tightened until every breath was work. Walt would wake up at dawn and ask for his pills in the calm voice of a man trying not to scare his daughter. Eli would ask why Mom wasn't home. Grant would smile and call it consequences. For the first time in 3 years, Claire let herself hate him, not the dramatic kind of hate that screams, the clear kind that opens your eyes. She wiped her face with her sleeve and whispered into the dark, "I'm done begging." Her phone vibrated again. A new text. Unknown number. No greeting. Only coordinates and one line. "I saved the footage. If you want your father protected, meet me in 10 minutes. Beyond the gate, headlights swept the driveway. A dark sedan waited where the club's cameras couldn't reach. Engine idling. Claire checked the time. Then the saved audio file on her phone. Grant's threat, clear as a knife. She started walking, heels silent on gravel, and she didn't look back at the windows. Claire stood up, and her tears stopped like someone had flipped a switch. The sedan carried Claire away from the club's glow and into the darker streets of East Hartford. The driver didn't speak. He simply handed her a bottled water and a card that read, "Harmon, Rhett, Judge, private number." "Keep your head down," he said. "Mr. Harmon asked me to bring you." Claire's fingers tightened around the card. Outside, streetlights slid across the windows like prison bars. She checked her phone again. The pharmacy still showed coverage denied. Another alert popped up from Eli's Academy portal. Pickup authorization updated. Her name was removed. Under it, a new contact appeared, Tess Lang. Panic rose. She called the school, but the office was closed. She called Grant. Straight to voicemail. When she tried the townhouse, the front porch light was on, but the lock turned stiff, then stopped. Someone had changed the cylinder. From inside she heard her father cough, a wet, frightened sound, then a stranger's voice. "Mr. Dawson, stay seated." Claire knocked hard. "Dad, it's Claire." Footsteps approached, Then the door opened a crack on a security chain. Grant's assistant looked out, expression blank. "Mrs. Whitaker." "Sorry, Miss Dawson," he corrected, enjoying it. "Mr. Whitaker said you're not allowed inside. Your father is being transferred to a care facility tonight. Insurance won't cover home care anymore." "You can't," Claire whispered. "He's sick. He needs his meds." The assistant held up a small cooler bag. "Medication is accounted for," he said, "but the pharmacy won't release refills without active coverage. That ends at midnight." He closed the door. Claire stood on the step, shaking. Her father's silhouette passed behind the curtains, small and confused. She wanted to break the glass, but Eli's photo in her wallet stopped her. One arrest, and Grant would own the story forever. The driver touched her elbow. "We can't stay," he murmured, glancing at a neighbor's porch camera. They drove to a 24-hour diner near the highway. Claire sat in a booth with sticky menus and stared at her bare hand, her missing ring, her missing keys, her missing place in her own home. She had never felt so erased. Across the aisle, a man in a gray coat approached, calm and steady. "Miss Dawson," he said, setting a thumb drive on the table. "I'm Harmon. I saw everything." He slid a folder beside the thumb drive. "Grant moves Walt at dawn. This clip proves it. And I'll testify today." Judge Harmon slid into the booth across from Claire like he belonged there. Late 60s, gray hair neat, eyes steady. He set a thumb drive beside the sugar caddy and opened a folder. "Tonight isn't gossip," he said. "It's evidence." Claire stared at the drive. "Why are you helping me?" "I'm retired now, but the oath doesn't expire. My wife died waiting for refill once. I don't watch a bully play doctor again, not in my town, not tonight." "Because I watched a man use a microphone to threaten a sick parent," Harmon said. "Because I watched a room laugh. And because the cameras caught it all." He tapped a printed log. "Hartford Oak Security, clip ID number 1187, time-stamped to the minute. The bartender saved it, and the system backs it to the cloud. I sent a preservation notice. They can't lose it now." Her throat tightened. "Grant changed the locks. He's moving my father at dawn." "Then we move first." Harmon slid over a card with a private number and another name beneath it. "Lila Carver, family attorney. She clerked for me. She'll file an emergency order before sunrise. We'll ask the court to block Walt's transfer and reinstate coverage pending litigation. Your husband can posture at a club, but he can't outrun a judge's signature." Claire's hand shook around her water glass. "He removed me from my son's pickup list." Harmon nodded, already dialing. "We'll fix that, too. I know the Academy's board chair, and if they hesitate, I'll testify Grant defamed you and endangered a disabled adult." The word testify felt like a door cracking open. Harmon leaned in. "One thing, Ms. Dawson. Did you steal?" "No," Claire said, voice raw. "I paid for my father's medicine. I paid 2 clinic bills for strangers." Grant called it theft. "Good," Harmon said. "Truth is simpler than lies, and lies unravel on camera." He pushed the folder closer. Inside were stills from the feed. Grant holding the envelope. Tessa whispering. The assistant's headset. Claire's phone recording on the table. The last page showed the HR email ending coverage at midnight, with a forwarding trail. Claire's eyes burned, but this time from relief. "What do we do now?" Harmon stood. "We go to my office. Carver is waiting with filings and a notary." He added softly, "Bring your phone. By morning, we'll be in court with a file thick enough to break him." Lila Carver's office was above a locksmith and below a yoga studio, but the conference table was laid out like a war room. She wore reading glasses on a chain and moved fast, printing, stapling, labeling tabs. Judge Harmon stood by the window calling contacts. Claire sat with her phone plugged into a laptop, watching files copy. Audio_grant_threat.m4a, text_unknown number, and the Hartford Oaks clip Marcus had saved. Carver slid a binder toward her. Exhibit A, security footage, clip ID number 1187. Exhibit B, your phone recording. Exhibit C, the HR email header. She flipped to a page of raw metadata showing the message route. A forwarding line jumped out in black type. From tessa.lang@whitakerfoundation.org to otgar@whitakeransons.com. Claire's stomach clenched. It wasn't a rumor. It was a trail. She also printed the bank statement showing the monthly $612 transfer coming from Claire's personal savings, and not company accounts, plus the refinance document Grant made her sign. Carver highlighted the clause in red and wrote, "Undue influence," in the margin. Exhibit D, Carver said, pharmacy denial log. She pointed to the timestamp, 9:02 p.m. Coverage cancel request received. That matches the assistant's headset audio. It's coercion. Harmon added a signed affidavit from Marcus, the bartender. He had watched Grant seize Claire's phone, watched the guard search her purse, and watched Tessa remove papers. Marcus's handwriting was shaky, but his statement was clear. He'd saved the clip to the cloud and would testify. Carver clicked open another file. "And this," she said, "is the Academy's change history." A screen showed Eli's pickup authorization edited at 9:47 p.m. User tlang.admin. They tried to isolate you from your child. Judges hate that. Claire exhaled for the first time in hours. The shame from the dining room didn't disappear, but it shifted, turning into something sharper. "So we can stop Walt's transfer?" she asked. "Tonight," Carver said. "Emergency order before sunrise. We'll also file for temporary support and a restraining order against harassment." She tapped the binder. "Grant wanted witnesses. He gave us a courtroom." Harmon's phone buzzed. He listened, then nodded once. "Club IT confirmed the footage is preserved," he said. Carver leaned closer to Claire, voice dropping. "This is strong," she said. "But to break him publicly, we need one final piece, proof of who sent that threat text." Claire's phone lit up with a new message. "Check your old safety deposit box. The answer is inside." At 1:12 a.m., Judge Harmon parked behind North-South Bank and led Claire and Lila Carver through a side door. The teller line was dark, but a single office light burned upstairs. An elderly security chief waited there, hands clasped, as if he'd been expecting a— "Ms. Dawson," he said, then corrected himself. "Ms. Sterling, your mother's key was never returned." Claire exhaled and handed over a small brass key she'd kept taped inside her sewing kit. Carver's eyes widened. "Claire, what is this?" "A promise," Claire said. "My mother made me swear I'd marry for love, not leverage. I used my father's last name and stayed small, but I never stopped protecting him." They descended to the vault. Inside box 417 sat a black binder, a second phone, and a sealed envelope marked Northbridge Holdings, beneficial owner. Now Claire opened it and slid out notarized trust papers. She was the sole trustee of Dawson Sterling Holdings, the entity that owned Northbridge, the insurer that covered Whitaker and Sons, and the creditor holding Whitaker's emergency loan. Harmon whistled softly. Carver blinked twice. So Grant has been threatening you with coverage you actually control. Exactly, Claire said. She turned on the second phone. A sent message thread appeared, time-stamped 8:58 p.m. If you try anything, your father's meds stop tomorrow. Sender, Whitaker Foundation SMS. Attached was the gateway log with an internal user ID, clang.admin. Carver's face hardened. That ties the threat to Tessa and to their system. It's admissible. Carver snapped photos of the screen and emailed them to the court clerk. This gives us probable cause for an emergency injunction, she said, and because Northbridge owns Whitaker's credit line, we can freeze the account Grant uses to pay staff and lock his corporate cards by sunrise. Claire pulled one more file, a pending calendar invite titled Vanguard Logistics, Friday 2 p.m. with Grant's name in bold. Beneath it, an email confirmation. CEO attendance confirmed, C. Sterling. Harmon leaned in. They've been chasing a ghost lender. They don't know it's you. Claire closed the binder, voice steady. You're not powerless, Carver said, and for the first time Claire believed it. She pocketed the brass key, stood straighter, and looked at the two of them. We stopped Walt's transfer at dawn, she said. Then we let Grant walk into that meeting thinking he's finally won. Carver nodded once. And at 2 p.m., you'll walk in after him. By 3:40 a.m., Claire had stopped shaking. In Carver's office bathroom, she washed her face, pinned her hair back, and looked at herself like a stranger who still deserved kindness. The humiliation at Hartford Oaks was real, but it was not the whole story. Grant had written a script for her, beg, bargain, break. She decided she would not read another line of it. First, she said, my father. Carver filed the emergency motion while Harmon called the on-call judge. Claire emailed Northbridge's compliance desk from the second phone, attaching the threat log and the pharmacy denial. 10 minutes later, a response arrived. Coverage restored pending review. A second ping followed from the pharmacy. Refill approved. Claire closed her eyes, swallowing a sob that felt like relief instead of weakness. Second, she said, my son. Harmon's contact at the academy answered at 4:07 a.m. The pickup authorization was reversed, and Claire's name was restored as primary guardian. Carver printed the confirmation and slid it into the binder. Paper beats lies, she said. Claire signed a new directive for Northbridge. Freeze Whitaker and Sons' corporate card account until an ethics audit was completed. Carver warned, they'll scream. Claire nodded. Let them. Screaming is all Grant has left when he can't control the room. At dawn, they drove to the townhouse with the court order in hand. A deputy met them at the curb and escorted Claire inside. Grant's assistant backed away, pale. Walt sat in his recliner, confused, an overnight bag at his feet. Claire knelt, took his hands, and said, Dad, you're staying with me? No one gets to move you like luggage. Walt's eyes filled, and he squeezed once. In the hallway mirror, Claire saw her bare finger and didn't flinch. I loved him, she whispered to Carver, but I will not be punished for that. She opened her wallet, found Eli's photo, and placed it in the binder's front pocket. This is who I answer to, she told Harmon. Then she typed one short email to Vanguard. Confirm Friday meeting. CEO attending in person. No more ghost signatures, no more intermediaries. She wanted Grant to walk in smiling and leave in silence. Carver lifted the binder. Friday, 2 p.m. Vanguard. Claire straightened. He wanted witnesses, she said. I'll give him a stage. Outside, Grant's black SUV rolled up fast, and he saw the deputy standing at Claire's door. Friday came fast. By noon, now Walt rested in his recliner with a visiting nurse checking his pulse and a fresh bottle of pills on the table. Eli had been dropped at school with Claire listed as primary guardian again, and the secretary had actually smiled like the world had snapped back into place. Claire didn't chase a glamorous makeover. She took a shower, dried her hair smooth, and put on the only thing that ever made her feel safe. Clean lines and silence. Carver met her at a tailor's shop and handed her a garment bag. Inside was a charcoal suit, crisp but simple, the kind a woman could wear to court or to war. Claire slipped on low black heels, checked that her hands were steady, and tucked her father's photo and Eli's into the binder's front pocket. In Harmon's car they rehearsed the order like a hymn. First, the Hartford Oaks clip, Grant's microphone. The threats, Tessa's whisper, the guard searching her purse. Second, the audio from Claire's phone, with the assistant's headset line about denying Walt's refill. Third, the email headers proving Tessa routed the coverage cancellation. Fourth, the SMS gateway log tying the threat text to tlang.admin. Carver added the refinance clause and the Academy Edit history, each tabbed, dated, and ready for a judge's eyes. "Don't raise your voice," Carver reminded her. "Let the documents do the shouting." Claire nodded. "And if Grant lies?" Harmon's mouth tightened. "Then I stand up. In a room like his, credibility is a weapon." At 1:45 p.m. they arrived at Vanguard Logistics Glass Tower. A security team waited, not surprised, because Claire had sent one email that morning from a private domain. CEO will attend in person. The elevator required a coded key card. The doors closed with a soft seal, and the city dropped away beneath them. Claire held the binder against her ribs, feeling its weight like a heartbeat. She wasn't walking in as someone's wife or someone's burden. She was walking in as the person who owned the debt, controlled the coverage, and had receipts for every cruelty. In her pocket, the brass key from Box 417 pressed into her palm, a reminder that hiding had been a choice, not fate. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open onto a silent executive floor. Grant's laughter spilled from the boardroom, right before he looked up and saw Claire step in. Grant's laughter died mid-breath. Around the glossy boardroom table, Vanguard's executives paused with pens in hand, all expecting the mysterious insurer Grant had promised would save Whitaker and Sons. He recovered fast, forcing a grin. "Claire, you're not allowed." "I'm exactly where I'm allowed," Claire said. "My legal name is Claire Sterling. I'm the trustee of Dawson Sterling Holdings, beneficial owner of Northbridge Insurance, and the creditor on Whitaker and Sons bridge loan." Murmurs rippled. The Vanguard CEO, a woman in a navy blazer, glanced at the agenda. "Northbridge is on this call," she said. "In person, apparently." Lila Carver placed the binder on the table and slid a preservation notice toward the corporate counsel. Judge Harmon stepped in behind her, calm as a bench. Grant laughed too loud. "This is a stunt. She's unstable." Claire tapped the conference screen remote. Video filled the wall. Hartford Oaks, the microphone, a Grant holding the divorce packet, His voice rang clear. Sign and he keeps his pills. Then the assistant's headset audio. Prescription denied at 9 a.m. Vanguard's counsel leaned forward. That's coercion. Claire clicked again. An email header appeared, enlarged, routing the coverage cancellation. The forwarding address highlighted in red. Tessa.lang@whitakerfoundation.org. Tessa, seated beside Grant with a polished smile, went rigid. That's not... Grant started. Carver held up the SMS gateway log. Internal user ID tlang.admin, she said. Same system used by the Foundation. Harmon raised his hand. I witnessed the statements live and will testify under oath, he said. Marcus, the bartender, appeared on the screen in a recorded affidavit, confirming he saved clip ID number 1187 to the cloud. The Vanguard CEO's expression cooled. Mr. Whitaker, you represented your company as compliant. You threatened medical care, defamed your spouse, and manipulated insurance. Grant's phone buzzed. A bank alert flashed. Corporate card suspended. His face drained. Vanguard's counsel closed his folder. Meeting over. We're terminating negotiations. A Whitaker board member stood. Grant, security will escort you out. We're voting on your removal today. Grant shoved his chair back, eyes wild, and pointed at Claire. If you do this, I'll take your son. 2 security officers appeared at the door. Grant's hand shook as he reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but a key card and a school form he'd stolen from Claire's purse. Carver moved to block him, but he surged forward. He lunged for her binder, shouting, give me the pickup codes now! Security moved before Grant reached the binder. 2 officers caught his arms, turned him, and pinned him against the glass wall. The stolen school form fluttered to the carpet. Grant shouted Claire's name like an accusation, then like a plea, but no one looked impressed. The Vanguard CEO nodded to her counsel. Call the police. Document everything. Lila Carver collected the papers without hurry, slid the binder back to Claire, and spoke to the room. For the record, Ms. Sterling has filed an emergency order protecting her father and child. Mr. Whitaker's threats were recorded. His company's cards are frozen pending audit. Any further contact will be harassment. Grant's board member cleared his throat. Grant Whitaker, you're suspended effective immediately. HR will escort you to retrieve personal items. Your access is revoked. Tessa tried to stand, but the counsel's stare stopped her. Ms. Lang, he said, you'll remain. We have questions about your account. On the ride down, Claire's knees finally softened. Judge Harmon squeezed her shoulder once. You did it the right way, he said, with facts. Outside, winter sunlight hit the sidewalk and felt almost gentle. By evening, Walt's nurse called with a steady report. Meds delivered, blood pressure stable. Eli came home with a spelling test and a shy smile. Mom, he asked, are we safe? Claire knelt and held him. Yes, she said, and I'm sorry you ever had to wonder. The court hearing came fast. Grant's attorney tried to argue misunderstanding. But the footage played, the email headers printed, and Harmon testified. The judge granted temporary support, restored coverage, and issued a no-contact order. 2 weeks later, Whitaker and Sons announced Grant's resignation and a compliance review. Hartford Oaks quietly revoked his membership. The clinic posted a simple statement. Claire had covered unpaid bills with her own money. Mrs. Jenkins hugged her in the hallway. The gossip faded, replaced by quiet respect and warm casseroles. for weeks. Claire moved Walt and Eli into a smaller home near the clinic, one with a sunny kitchen and neighbors who waved. She donated the cruel settlement check to the clinic's patient fund and kept one souvenir, the brass key from Box 417, on her keyring, a reminder that privacy is not weakness. If you're listening, she thought, don't confuse love with surrender. Ask questions. Keep your receipts, and never let anyone threaten your family to buy your silence. All right. So that's how her story closes. And hey, if you're still here with me right now, that means something in this hit your heart in a real way. Maybe you've been the one kept small. Maybe you've been the one told to be grateful while someone quietly tightened the leash. What this story teaches, without preaching, is simple. Love is not supposed to feel like fear. Control dressed up as family honor is still control. And healing doesn't always start with a big speech. Sometimes it starts with one quiet sentence. I'm done begging. The Stoics had a line that fits perfectly here. You have power over your mind, not outside events. When Claire stopped chasing approval and started standing on truth, the whole world shifted. And there's another reminder that's basically self-respect in one breath. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Not because you owe anyone perfection, but because boundaries, documents, and clear choices are how you protect the people you love. If this story gave you strength or even just a little hope, please like, share, and subscribe so more people who need this message can find it.